going on, guys? Welcome back to the Game Time Discussions. I'm Emery Cuzzy. I'm sitting here with Cameron Selby, and we're going to talk about the main slate for week 4. Yeah, week 4, Maine.
Already week 4, man.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's coming.
Damn.
It's happening fast. But yeah, so we're going to talk about Maine. Main slate happens at 12 o'clock on Sundays. It is 12 games this week, I believe. So we have a lot of opportunities to get a lot of guys into our lineups. Cam always talks about how eating the chalk and not being chalky at the same time is really easy on Maine because there are so many players that you can pick from. I want to let you talk about some of the 5 highest totals because there are some really, really high scoring games this week.
Yeah, so basically the first one that, is going to be one of my favorite games on the slate is Washington at Arizona. Arizona in a dome. Positive game environment. 50.5 point total is 3 higher than the next highest total. It's going to be fireworks. We just saw Jaden Daniels light it up last night on Monday Night Football against the Bengals. Arizona Cardinals have been, not only one of the worst defenses, but they've been, one of the better offenses in terms of scoring. They dropped 40 on the Rams. Last week, it was actually a lower scoring game, mostly because Detroit was just kind of milking clock the entire game. But that was the highest total on the slate. But guess what? Amon-Ra St. Brown still went off. Jameer Gibbs still went off. David Montgomery still went off. So even though the point totals were lower, and then Marvin Harrison had a good game, Trey McBride was really the only dud, but he also got concussed, in the middle of their kind of garbage time comeback run. Michael Wilson had a great game. So basically, if you target that game despite the score, still killed it. But yeah, just sorry about that tangent. Cincinnati, Carolina is the next highest total. Basically, Cincinnati, desperation, 0-3 all of a sudden after dropping a home game to the Washington Commanders. And then Andy Dalton led Carolina Panthers, the only quarterback to have 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in a game this season is the guy that has only had 1 start. It's also a revenge game. Going to be a very fun one. Should be points on both sides because both defenses have been very, very bad to start this season. Next up, Jacksonville, Houston in a division rival game. Jacksonville also dropped another one last night to be 0-3. Houston was embarrassed last week against Minnesota, 45-point total. Minnesota dropped 4 passing touchdowns on Houston. Jacksonville, meanwhile, had 4 passing touchdowns in the first half allowed on them. So basically, it should be a shootout. We saw some very positive game environments from CJ Stroud, especially last year, and that was without Stephon Diggs. So definitely a huge game to prioritize on the main slate. Next game, Philly at Tampa. This one's kind of interesting. One, because there's some injuries. Obviously, Devontae Smith concussed last week. A.J. Brown milking a hamstring injury. I don't know if they'll force him back or not, especially if Devontae Smith's out. The Britton Covey. He's out 6 to 8 weeks as well. They are absolutely shredded at the receiver position. That is probably a game that we're willing to fade out of this highest totals if all of them are out. But maybe some worthy candidates to target. And then also, this is one of the 2 games that there could be potential, rainy weather and stuff like that could affect passing game as well. So maybe a game that we might be being less to the field on.
Right.
And then lastly, another division game. Saints coming off a huge 91 points first 2 weeks, then had a dud of a scoring outing against the Eagles last week. Atlanta almost came back on the Chiefs for the second straight week, almost had a massive comeback against a powerhouse team. They are looking to avoid going 1-3. And this will be a huge tiebreaker game, especially for both teams if they end up 2-2. Atlanta getting the advantage over them once again.
Yeah. We're going to start off. I'm going to pull the screen up right now. There we go. And looking at the slate and looking at pricing and everything, we're going to talk about 7 quarterbacks this week. And I actually made Cam narrow it down because he wanted to talk about 9. And I was like, we're going to be here for 2 hours. But it's because there's just so many good quarterbacks in good situations this week. I understood why he wanted to do it.
It was interesting last week. Last week, you either had to spend up or puke it up.
Yeah.
And we killed it on the pukes, especially Andy Dalton. That, again, less than 5% owned, had 3 touchdowns at halftime, 300 yards. It was awesome. The only thing is the lines that we played him with, not all of them had Deontay Johnson. He was the preference. And then also Adam Thielen did get hurt.
Yeah.
And he is on IR now. So, but then spinning up, a lot of guys did well, but CJ Stroud, multiple turnovers. He just was awful. That was a bad call on my part. And then Jalen Hurts, he played well. but then 2 red zone turnovers is kind of what did him in. He didn't score a touchdown, and so that's kind of why he was kind of underwhelming. However, if you did double stack him, before Devontae Smith went out, he had 6 for 84,
Right.
and then Dallas Goedert popped off 10 for
Best
160.
best value on the slate.
Exactly. And he was less than 5% owned. So even though, Jalen Hurts didn't work out, that line probably still did well. Or it didn't kill you having Jalen Hurts underwhelmed because the other guys that you doubled him with ended up working out.
Right. So this week, there's actually some guys up top that we're going to talk about, mid-tier and puke this week. Starting off at the top, though, we're going to go back to the well. CJ Stroud, he's 7,000. He's actually come down, I believe, $200. Going against Jacksonville at home. He hasn't had his breakout game, and it's coming, and he's going to throw for 350 pretty soon. Will it be Jacksonville? Why? I mean, I could see it happening that way. I have a really big question, actually.
Yeah.
Is Jacksonville going 0-4? Like, honestly, can you put that?
I can't pick them this week.
No, I can't either. But at the same time, 0-3 teams, Cincinnati. I just don't see those two teams going 0-4. And they just happen to run into, like, in this situation, Jacksonville runs into Houston. Does Houston have to get screwed out of this deal, basically? Because
either way, there should be some huge fireworks coming out of this game. Obviously, CJ Stroud, 2 of his best games last year came from the Jacksonville game.
Right.
Obviously, he had a 2-touchdown, 280-yard game. And then the following game, he had 304 yards, 2 touchdowns. A lot of that, if I remember correctly, was to Tank Dell. He had a big breakout game against them, trying to pull up the box score, but StatMuse is not being friendly right now.
Well, talking about some of those receivers, you got Nico at 7,200. You've got Stephon Diggs at 6,600. Tank Dell at 5,400. Dalton Schultz at 4,100. Lots of ways to stack him. Lots of ways to stack CJ. And then there's a lot of guys also on the bring back that you could go to for the Jaguars. So it's a game of fireworks, and we're going to just try to get some of it, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, with this game last year, I also didn't mention CJ Stroud, who's not a running quarterback, had 47 yards rushing and a rushing touchdown as well. So, yeah, incredible score. That was probably his highest scoring game of the entire season. But, yeah, so one of the games, Nico Collins, 7 for 104 and a touchdown. Tank Dell ended up 5 for 50 in the score with a couple of rushing attempts as well. And then the second game, really quick, goodness gracious, StatMuse. Okay, so it was probably more of the same. I'm pretty sure that was the game that Tank Dell, that was like the 3rd straight game of him being a value, and we were like, this is not going to happen again, is it? And then he just had another 60-yard touchdown because he was very effective, before he went down with injury. So Tank Dell, he has been a guy that we faded in best ball, that they are trying to get involved, and it's just not working out so far. His breakout is also coming. Probably, it's tougher to predict his because we know CJ Stroud against a good matchup is going to kind of rebound because that's kind of what he does. But when Tank Dell is the obvious 3 in an offense that has Stephon Diggs, who was peppered again with targets in his revenge game against Minnesota, and then Nico Collins, who had an okay game, but at the very end, even with CJ Stroud not in, all 4 downs at the goal line, red zone target to Nico Collins.
Yep.
So they're basically saying he is the alpha, Stephon Diggs is the 1B, and then Tank Dell is the 3rd option. But Tank Dell is now affordable enough to where you can double him if you want to. And again, he's capable of having that breakaway touchdown and being optimal on the slate. I think his ownership is kind of eventually going to start coming down to where it's going to be a very interesting, 5%er play, but maybe not this week.
Fair enough. Next guy on the list is that game that we want to target, Washington, Arizona, Kyler Murray. Kyler, when he is good, is really good. He gets, he can break a slate, 28.54 against the Rams, where he had the 2 touchdowns of Marvin Harrison. Last week, played a pretty tough Detroit team in general, defensively, which was, not a great game script. Well, it was a great game script, not a great outing for him necessarily, though. He has had 5 rushing attempts, keeps his floor really high. We always love to see that for quarterbacks, giving about 5.5 points a game, basically on the rushing upside. But yeah, we know where the ball's going.
Yeah, and first off, I do want to correct myself. So I did say Andy Dalton was the only quarterback to do 3 touchdowns and 300 yards. He was the first to do it. Joe Burrow just did it last night.
Right.
In garbage time, trying to come back. So 3 touchdowns, 300 yards, and they're both playing the same
Each
game.
other.
And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, with Kyler Murray going against Washington, Washington has just allowed a lot of stuff to quarterbacks, and they haven't really figured it out yet. The first game, 289 and 4 touchdowns to Baker Mayfield. Obviously, I called a puke stack. Daniel Jones the following week, he had 2 touchdowns, and then his rushing yards got him to about 18 points. Very good value when he was only 5,300.
Right.
And then last night, Joe Burrow had his breakout game where he had 324, 3 scores. They can't stop the pass at all. And Kyler Murray is pretty simple to know where he's going to be targeting the ball.
Right.
One thing to note, Trey McBride was concussed at the end of the game, like I mentioned. He went out. It'll be interesting to see if he does play. If he does not play, very affordable options with Greg Dortch and Michael Wilson, who, Michael Wilson's been getting more of the snaps. Dortch has been getting more of the targets, but Wilson's kind of been more consistent, at least in that regard. Greg Dortch led the team in targets week 1, kind of has been so-so since. But both of them, I think, 43 and 4,200 respectively.
Yes.
Very easy to double with Marvin Harrison Jr., who should be one of the best plays as a receiver on this league.
Yeah, Michael Wilson had 9 targets last week. Yep. So, I mean, that's plenty to get at 4,200 or what? 4,200 for him. Greg Dortch is 43. Let's talk about the other side of this game, because our next guy on this list is Jaden Daniels. 6,500 after what he did to the Cincinnati Bengals is criminal. He has got 2 games this year where he's gone for 28 points. He is a single stack king. You do not need to double stack this guy because you are probably not going to find very much luck. His most expensive pass catcher not at running back is 5,800 in Terry McLaurin. After that, it is 4,000. So if you wanted to double stack him because you want to get really cheap, fine. I just don't think it's worth it.
So it's interesting. I think a double stack is viable, but it's the most predictable double this week. So obviously they did play last night. Austin Eckler was concussed, and he didn't fly home with the team. He's not playing this week.
Yeah.
So that means you're feeding Brian Robinson. So not only is he going to have a high volume, whenever they pull out the props, they haven't pulled him out because of that injury, but we're going to smash those props for Brian Robinson. Terry McLaurin finally had his breakout game. I'm just going to listen to coach speak, and if coaches say, I want to try to get him more involved, we're going to listen, because last night, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns after having 33 yards the first 2 games combined. Incredible performance. Game-sealing touchdown late with Jaden Daniels. He's been playing incredible. He set the rookie record for completion percentage in a game with 91%. 2 complete incompletions last night and 3 touchdowns total. He's been playing incredible. Once again, Arizona, very susceptible, defensively. They actually haven't really allowed a ton to quarterbacks. We prioritized Matthew Stafford week 2 for injury reasons. That did not work out because obviously Cooper Kupp went down. Puka Nacua was already hurt, and it was just a shit show from there.
Right.
And then last week, Jared Goff, we weren't really getting to because it was 65. Amon-Ra was 82. We were like, we'd rather get Gibbs, and we're just not going to force that expensive. But Jared Goff didn't really play that well. And also Detroit has just been so run heavy that they've just been grinding clock and stuff like that. I think each of the first 3 games, they've accumulated 200 total yards between both of their running backs, which has been incredible. So with this matchup, very incredible matchup for both. Good game environment, no weather concerns whatsoever. I expect both quarterbacks to just kind of light it up. And obviously you see Jaden Daniels, 2 of his 3 games, 28 plus points. Week 2, he played well. They just had 7 field goals.
Yeah.
So he led 7 scoring drives, played very well from a football perspective. He just didn't punch one in. Otherwise, it would have been perfectly fine getting 17 or even 19 points. But yeah, incredible play. And honestly, he's still too cheap for how well he's been playing.
Well, yeah. And also he has the upside to score a touchdown on the ground. He's got 3 this year, 2 in the first game. If he didn't have those field goals that you were just talking about, he would have obviously been much, much better than 28, which is even scary. But yeah, so going on to our next guy, We're going to look at a guy that some people are probably not okay with when we say this name, but
So
it's just perfect.
here's the funny thing. Like typically when we consider puke stacks, it's 5,500 and below.
This
He's
is
56,
yeah,
but you could basically consider him a puke stack because of the way he started and how it just sounds like ugly that you don't want to play him. But what
right.
I want to talk about is how he just all of a sudden elevated his game to finally get the yardage going.
Right.
Because in fantasy, it doesn't matter how well you're playing or how bad you're playing. 2 picks does not matter. You got 363 yards. I'm gonna ride with you. If you get 52 passing attempts, 37 the week before, I'm gonna ride with you. Keenan
Absolutely.
Allen's back this week. They're just kind of going away from DeAndre Swift. He is just not working out. Great call on a fade by us, but great game environment. The Rams again, they just allowed 40 points to the Cardinals, and then following that, Brock Purdy 3 passing touchdowns, all to Juwan Jennings. They're just giving it up left and right through the air. This is a get right spot for Caleb Williams. He's too cheap, and it's a good game environment if the weather holds up.
Well, Cole Kmet too. Someone I don't think you had said in that. Okay, yeah. DJ Moore 6,700, Keenan Allen 6,100, Roma Dunze is 52, and then Cole Kmet is 44. I think that it's viable to put running backs with Caleb Williams because DeAndre Swift does not run the ball. Roschon Johnson is actually got more touches on the ground.
Yeah, so he didn't play the first 2 games, and then all of a sudden came out of nowhere, had 33 snaps, 37% of the snap share, and he was efficient.
Yes.
DeAndre Swift is averaging like 2 yards a carry. He's been atrocious this year, especially the fact that they went out and paid him. Roschon is probably the best overall running back in this room. I don't know why I understand why, because he was coming off an injury that he sat week 1. I don't know why he was just healthy but just not playing week 2.
Yeah.
And then week 3, they finally let him loose with Travis Homer missing, and he just made the most of his opportunity. Khalil Herbert's just been a goal line guy. Maybe he'll vulture something, but Roschon at 4,100, basically minimum price, very reasonable to get to. I don't know if he'll be incredibly owned, but yeah, we like him a lot, and it'll make us feel even better with our best ball stand that we took with him.
Absolutely. He might be a guy that you get in this game if you like a Rams player too, like just separate because he is so cheap. You can kind of fit everything if you put him in your line.
Mm-hmm.
The next guy is our first puke stack because he is 5,500, so he just breaks that threshold. It is Justin Fields against Indy. Indy is awful on defense, absolutely terrible on defense, and Justin Fields has actually been, really serviceable in his last game against the Chargers. 25 of 32 for 245, a touchdown. He's still going to run the ball. He needs to obviously. You're not happy with 6 for 6, but 1 touchdown. So he made up for it.
Right. I mean, with Indy's sample size as a defense, I don't even really want to count the Green Bay game because that was the Malik Willis game that they're just like, I'm not going to throw the ball at all. He had 14 pass attempts in a pass happy league. So really, I want to talk about Houston and then Chicago. Houston, they allowed 160 all-purpose yards to Joe Mixon. They allowed 2 receiving touchdowns to Stephon Diggs in his debut, and then Nico Collins over 100 yards. Last week against Chicago, who obviously Caleb Williams started out less than 250 yards combined his first 2 games, 363 through the air, and then they allowed Roma Dunze 6 for 112 in a score.
Yep.
Cole Kmet 10 for 97 in a score, and then DJ Moore 8 for 78. Kind of pedestrian, but as a third, if that's the third most that you allow through the air,
oh yeah,
you're kind of in trouble with Justin Fields, like you mentioned with Jaden Daniels. You can really get away with the single stack with him because you know where the targets are going. Obviously, George Pickens, he hasn't had his incredible breakout game yet, but it's coming. And I actually think it might be this week because it's a great game environment for him. They've been allowing a lot through both the air and the ground.
Yeah.
But on top of that, Jaylen Warren getting an MRI. He left the second half of the game last week. Najee Harris walking around in a sling yesterday. Like, I don't know if they're I'd be optimistic that Najee will play.
Yes.
But maybe they're not going to give him 22 touches like they have each of the first 3 games. Obviously, the first 3 games, they've been, kind of pedestrian in terms of, scoring. They've only scored 20 points once, but they're going against Atlanta, Denver, and the Chargers, who are all pretty solid defensively, especially when allowing points. So he's been incredible. He has basically earned this job the rest of the season in my eyes. Like, I don't see any way that you can go back to Russell Wilson, but this way, 5,500 in a get right spot because he hasn't statistically had a breakout game. It's coming.
Mhm.
I think it's this week.
The prices on this team are too cheap in
Yep.
general. 5,500 for Justin Fields, 5,700 for George Pickens, which we are probably going to have a lot of him, especially if we play this stack. And then Najee Harris at 5,600. If you think he gets those 22 carries, he's going to be very good. DeForest Buckner out for the year. It just this Indy defense is not the same Indy defense that they had been in the past, and it's showing. I think that getting some of these guys is going to really help your line based on price for sure.
Yeah, and I even want to mention, Cordell Patterson, he's running back eligible. And obviously he took basically all of the workload that Jalen Warren had in the second half. He ended up with 23 snaps in this past game. But he's been a receiving threat, day in and day out, and been vulturing from the players that we've been wanting to play.
Right.
Also, Van Jefferson, who's been the wide receiver 2, getting over 70% of the snaps the first 2 weeks. He left the game. Calvin Austin actually made the most of his opportunity, going 4 for 95 in a score on 5 targets. He's only 3,300, pretty solid value if you do want to double. And then Pat Freiermuth, again, another guy that hasn't really broken out yet, but he's getting a decent target share, and he's 3,900. So another positive game environment. We were talking about just Cole Kmet splitting tight end reps,
Yep.
and then all of a sudden 10 for 97 in a score. So same kind of similar thing where he's not really getting a ton of it. I mean, he had 58% of the snaps week 2, 44% for Darnell Washington, and then Darnell had 50% week 3. So he's been fighting snap shares with him. But again, he's going to have some games throughout this year where it's going to be, getting those 15 to 17 points.
Right.
We've seen 100-yard games from him before, and I'm not shocked at all if that happens. And if I'm going to have a Dallas Goedert-like call of this week, it would be Pat Freiermuth, because I'm not saying he's going for 160, but again, we've seen him go over that 100-yard threshold before, him be a multi-touchdown scorer. Justin Fields, we saw him score 7 touchdowns with Cole Kmet last year. He's in a good spot, under 4,000. If you don't like these tight ends, because they have not been working out this year,
right,
very cheap and easy to get to.
For sure. The next guy on our list is going to be True Puke.
Yes.
Deshaun Watson going against the Raiders. If you saw what the Red Rifle did last week, you understand why he's on here. The problem is Deshaun Watson has not gone over 200 yards in any game this year, but we do have a pretty good idea where these passes are going. Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy. If David Njoku is back, I think that actually throws more of a wrench in things than anything, because if he's back, then we have 3 mouths to feed rather than just the 2 main mouths. But yeah, otherwise, I just think that this is a pretty straightforward stack.
Yeah, I mean, with Deshaun, this is the true puke, because this is the one that I don't really feel comfortable with. The other 4, and there's 4 this week, I feel good about the spots that they're in. With him, the spot's good. He just has not been playing well.
Right.
And so that's kind of the scary thing. But like you said, the targets are straightforward. Amari Cooper finally had his breakout game with him. Jerry Jeudy, first 3 games as a Brown, 6 targets at least in every game.
Yeah.
He scored a touchdown already. And then Jordan Akins, who's a cheap tight end who's been replacing David Njoku in short order, playing basically all the snaps that he can with him. He had a decent target share last week. He had 7 targets. And I believe he is 3,000 on the dot.
Yep.
So very easy to get to if you wanted to go that route. I don't blame you. And on top of that, he probably won't be too highly owned, despite the really solid matchup. Obviously, if Andy Dalton's going to be able to do it, Deshaun should be able to do the same thing.
Yep. I think that in this game, if you're going to go to Deshaun, you have to double stack. I think Jerome Ford could be viable. I think he is a possible 6 target kind of running back, which makes him an option. So if you want to get Jerome Ford and get a little weird, that's always an option too, and especially because of the price point. Amari Cooper 6,300, and then Jerry Jeudy 5,200. Njoku's 5K if he is back, which is a lot. And I'm less comfortable if he's back.
I'm hoping that they do sit him one more week.
Right.
Because of that.
My fantasy team doesn't want that, but if it does happen, it makes more sense for wanting to play this stack. If he plays, I'm even more or less confident in it, because I won't know as easily where the target share is going to go.
Mm-hmm.
Final guy is, we just got to go back to the well, man. Where is he's 53, right? Yep, there he is. Andy Dalton, the Red Rifle, 319 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. I mean, you can't ask for more from a guy that was 4,800 last week. and he's in a situation, he's in a game where Cincinnati has just been terrible. So
right, and the first 2 games, honestly, I don't even know. I still don't even know how to process how the Cincinnati Kansas City game went, just because statistically it was such a weird game,
right,
in itself. And then the first week it was pretty much a wash because the worst passing attack in the NFL is the New England Patriots. And on top of that, New England was playing from the lead the entire time, so they didn't really allow stuff. Well, how are they going to do when they actually have a viable passing offense? Well, Jaden Daniels in his 3rd career game could do no wrong.
right.
So I just don't expect Andy Dalton to not be able to keep on going on with the momentum that he has. Obviously, he had 37 pass attempts. Like I mentioned when I brought him up as a puke stack, they were not afraid to let him rip it.
Right.
And so obviously he's going to have upwards of 35, 40 pass attempts every week. And then the thing is, you kind of know exactly where they're going to.
Well, now for
Deontay
sure.
Johnson, 14 targets last week. Obviously, he had an incredible game. Adam Thielen was our call as the preferred option. Pretty much wrong on that one, even before the injury.
Right.
He did score on the play that he got hurt, but Deontay Johnson was already killing it and had his touchdown before that. But Deontay 56, Xavier Legette started getting more of a snap share. He's up to 59% last week, a career high. He's starting to creep up, and I'd expect him to take over more of the 3 receiver set role with Jonathan Mingo. Both of those guys very affordable. I think Mingo is in the 3,000s.
33.
Yeah, 3,300, and then Xavier Legette right around 4,500, kind of as a cheap value that, again, I don't think many people are going to just kind of gravitate towards. And then obviously you got to mention Chuba Hubbard because he was in the optimal line last week. Incredible all-purpose yardage game. He just tore him up.
If Chuba Hubbard is going to get this type of like action, he's way too cheap. Like
Right.
Truly, a guy that's going to get this many targets, this many opportunities has to be in the 6,000s. And so 5,700 is just too cheap. Now
he did all that 58% snap share.
Yeah,
that's
but
pretty incredible.
Can he do it again is the real question. That's what we have to ask ourselves before we put him in the line. But with Andy Dalton,
well, again,
anything is possible.
The part of the reason that we like Brian Robinson last night, and obviously Brian Robinson, they scored 3 rushing touchdowns. It just won by each person. Austin Eckler obviously also had a 57-yard game on 5 touches before he went down.
Right.
So it was more of a committee approach. But the week before, over 100 yards allowed to Isaiah Pacheco. The week before that, over 110 yards allowed to Ramondre Stevenson. So they're susceptible to running backs as well. So even if you didn't want to go the Dalton route, Chuba as a standalone play, very viable. But even if you wanted to double him just because of the lack of options, I don't mind that either.
Right, fair enough. But yeah, so Andy Dalton is our last stack. He's not actual puke. I don't think that that's a fair statement with Andy. But let's go to the running backs and talk about some of these studs. There are 5 studs on our list that we haven't talked about their teams yet. Saquon Barkley against Tampa Bay, against the 30th ranked team, and Saquon has 30.1 fantasy points per game right now. He is just lighting it up. He was one of our worst calls, to be honest. It's okay. He has been really, really good, and they are letting him run at the goal line.
I mean, he was one that we didn't really fade or just avoid, but we were just like, we'd rather have JT, which JT hasn't been bad.
No, yeah.
It's just Anthony Richardson sucks, so they don't have a lot of scoring opportunities yet. And then also Kyron Williams, we liked him. Well, guess what? He's got 5 touchdowns and he's played 9% of the snaps, so we're not wrong on him either. It's just Saquon has had basically rookie Saquon-like numbers.
Right.
And it's going to be even better knowing that possibly Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown will be missing this game. So if Tampa Bay is going to allow 100-plus receiving yards through running backs in week 1, and then over 200 yards allowed to Detroit running backs in week 2, and then Denver, it was more of a committee approach, but Tyler Batty is running for 43-yard gains, 70 yards on 9 touches.
Yeah.
And then Jaleel McLaughlin's juking out defensive ends for end-around touchdowns.
Making them fall.
Basically, Tampa Bay, without Vita Vea and Antoine Winfield, very just kind of not what they used to be.
Right.
Bottom 10 defense at this point, and Saquon just has all the volume in the world. Obviously, he's the most expensive on the slate for a good reason. He is definitely worth getting to if you can get up to him.
Yep. The next couple guys, one of them is my favorite on the week, and we have him green, so I'm guessing that means he's your favorite too. We'll talk about Breece Hall first, though. Yep. Against Denver, at home, 5-box running back, one of the best players one of the best running backs in football. I worry obviously about Braylon, and if this game gets out of hand, you get the possible New England game that he had last week at 18.3. That's not going to get it done on this slate at 7,800, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to need a really big blow up game, and so that's why Breece Hall is a little bit more nerve wracking than maybe Saquon.
Right. So with Denver, they've been solid in terms of not allowing a ton of points this year. Obviously, Tampa was coming in pretty hot offensively and just stifled them for 7 points on the road to get their first win.
Right.
Only allowed 13 points to Pittsburgh, who have been a lesser offense, but still, even with that, they're still kind of susceptible through the ground.
Yeah.
They've been given giving up big plays. Obviously, Kenneth Walker was one of our favorite plays week 1. Had 109 all-purpose yards and a touchdown. Would have had 2, but DK Metcalf, I hate you. And then the second one, basically Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris splitting reps, but still combined for over 120 all-purpose yards. And then last week, obviously Rachaad White is just no longer like, even in the public size, a good running back. We were never high on him to begin with.
He's a bad running back.
He's a bad running back that would catch passes. But Bucky Irving running 9 for 70 and then getting a couple of receptions as well. They're still giving up big chunk plays. And Breece Hall, obviously he's not getting the 90% snap share that one would have thought.
Right.
But at the same time, he's still very good. And when they get to the red zone, he's the guy they go to, and it's not really anybody else close to him at this point.
Yeah, I think we're gonna, and just going to a guy that we're not even talking about, but the Rachaad White versus Bucky Irving situation. I think next year it's going to be the Tony Pollard esque thing that happens for Bucky Irving, where he's overly highly drafted and then sucks because he's got a true workload.
Or on the flip side, they draft one of the heavy depth of this backfield, and then it's just a 1-2 punch like a David Montgomery-esque Jahmyr Gibbs, and who knows if he can even be in that same sentence.
Just wait till this draft class happens, everybody.
I'm so excited.
It's going to be awesome. But now let's talk about the guy that is highlighted in green over here on my sheet. He is just so good at football, man.
Mm-hmm.
Some Bijan Robinson. He hasn't had his breakout game, and I think that this week sets up very nicely for him. So I'm excited about playing him this week. He's going to get, probably close to 20 touches, and he's going to be great.
So with New Orleans, it's interesting because the first 2 games, obviously, they were the hottest team in football, and just incredible performance, 91 points through 2 games. And obviously the Panthers and the Cowboys were both down 3+ touchdowns at halftime. Very negative game script. So obviously it correlated with them not allowing anything. They were number 1 against running backs going into week 3. Well, Saquon tore them to bits. And obviously going with 156 and 2 touchdowns, he just did whatever he wanted. He was just all over the field, making plays. And it was just kind of worth noting that they really struggled towards the end of the season last year against running backs. And we didn't really know if that was fixed or if it was just a bad sample size the first 2 weeks. But Bijan, obviously he was inconsistent last year, but he was very good against the Saints. 2 of his best games actually came against the Saints. I'm bringing up his game log right now. He ended up with 24 fantasy points in his first game, went over 100 receiving yards. And in the second game, multi-touchdown, 90+ rushing yards. And that was when he was getting the annoying usage with the Cordell Patterson and Tyler Algier. Well, now he's getting way more snaps. It's just he hasn't had the breakout game yet. He obviously scored last week, but it was very kind of inefficient. But 90% of the snaps week 1, 75% week 2, 82% week 3. On top of being as good as he is, those numbers are going to lead to a 30+ point game soon, and it might just be this week.
Yep, I completely agree. There it is. There we go. Talk about a couple other guys real quick. We're going to talk about the Kyron Williams of the world and Jordan Mason. Those 2 guys are both in situations that make a lot of sense for them. Chicago, I expect the Chicago Rams game to be very high scoring, and it's actually at 41 right now. We have a weather watch for that game, so be careful if that game does get some bad weather. You probably should not play Caleb Williams because of the situation and him having to throw the ball 40 times.
Mm-hmm.
And then with Jordan Mason, he's playing New England, and as much as they've done okay and they're 14th against running backs. New England versus San Francisco. San Francisco's O line is going to just absolutely demolish them. So get some Jordan Mason.
Yeah. So with really quick to Kyron Williams, obviously we didn't play him last week. They were a huge dog at home, and somehow, some way, they won that game. It was pretty
It was
incredible.
crazy.
Didn't lead a second until the final 2 seconds. But Kyron Williams, we should have just been like, he's all they got. Just play him.
I literally said, are they just going to make Kyron the guy that just gets every touch?
Right now, he has so many injuries to deal with on the offensive line, so he's going to average more often than not less than 4 yards a carry. Don't say that it's because he's inefficient. He's dealing with a lot, but he's taking all the snaps away. Blake Corum hasn't had a single non-garbage time snap this season.
Yep.
And basically
Ronnie Rivers is the second guy.
Exactly. So Kyron, 90% snap share, 3 touchdown game last week. He scored in every single game. I think he's leading in all-purpose touchdowns right now with 5.
I believe so.
So he's in a spot start against the Bears, who just allowed 135 and 2 touchdowns to Jonathan Taylor. Week 1, it was a little different because Houston actually was not great against the run, and then also Joe Mixon got hurt, so that kind of didn't help with things. But then week 1, both Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard averaged over 5 yards a carry, so maybe he'll be a little bit more efficient and flirt with that 100-yard bonus, but he's going to get 25 opportunities. He would be a 5-box running back if it weren't for him being on the road this week. So definitely worth playing if you can get to him. He'll probably be the less owned of all these guys because Saquon, everybody's going to want to gravitate towards because of how he started. Breece Hall, a lot of touches, a lot of efficiency.
Of course.
Bijan, we just love Bijan. So maybe he's not as popular this week, but he's probably more viable as a favorite at home. And then Jordan Mason, obviously, he's still too cheap because he's a 5-box running back in a game that they're going to play pissed off, and they're obviously dealing with injuries themselves.
Yeah, they're going to, he has 20 opportunities in every game he's played in, 29 in the first game. He's going to be a guy that definitely gets as many opportunities as they can give him, and they're the better team, offensive line versus defensive line. They're going to just be moving them. So yeah, I think that all 5 of those are our 5 studs. Next, we're going to go to the mid-tier. 3 of the guys in the mid-tier we've actually kind of already talked about. So I'll run through those guys real quick. It's Brian Robinson and his opportunity share. Chuba Hubbard, who had a crazy game last week. And then Najee Harris. If you are on the possibility that he gets 22 touches, he is going to do really well in his opportunities against Indy.
He's had a lot of opportunities. He hasn't scored yet this season. So he's 10 points a game, but you add a touchdown to that at 16 points, and I will take that every day, twice on Tuesday, which is today.
5,600.
At 5,600. But the one we also had to mention, Aaron Jones in a interesting revenge spot. Obviously, it's the 3-0 Vikings going to Green Bay this week. Possibly a Jordan Love return. It sounded like he was getting close last week, and they ended up resting him, which I thought was the right call.
Yes, agreed.
But there's a lot more. If he was close that last week, it's a lot more likely that he could play this week. And that honestly just kind of makes this one of the more sneaky games on the slate that we actually might even need to put in one of the contrarian options, depending on if the weather kind of plays away against 2 of the games that we mentioned previously. But yeah, great start to the year. Obviously, he had 148 all-purpose yards and a touchdown receiving last week. Week 2, San Francisco, if you're going to be inefficient, it's okay, but he still had 6 targets, 5 catches, 36 yards. And then week 1, in a very positive game script, very efficient, 109 yards and a touchdown. Green Bay, kind of a similar ordeal where, they allowed 3 touchdowns and a ton of yards to Saquon week 1.
Right.
Week 2, they allowed over 120 yards, but Indy just was like, I'm going to let Anthony Richardson take us and not JT.
Yeah.
And so he didn't have his smash game, but he did very, very well. And then last week, obviously, was a weird one because Tennessee, we mentioned Tony Pollard was possibly viable. We didn't play him, but it's a poor, idea to, call out when, he combines for, 29 total yards on 9 touches. So that was a very interesting one, but also Tennessee, not one of the offenses that we're going to be targeting heavily in terms of running backs this year. Minnesota's looked really, really good. And obviously, if Jordan Addison's back, I think that kind of helps spread out a little bit because it's just kind of been JJ and Jalen Naylor so far. And so one more pass catcher will just kind of open things up a little bit more for Aaron Jones in a revenge spot. like I mentioned.
Aaron Jones is a 4-box running back because he's not at home, but everything else fits in place. He does catch the ball. He will have 20 opportunities, and they are going to be most likely ahead in this game. Our best value plays are going to be the Chiefs running backs. We aren't sure what's going to happen with Kareem Hunt. He did get moved up into the active roster.
Yeah, they ended up cutting Keontae Ingram and then bring him to 53. Who knows if he'll make the 46? But him playing this week kind of makes me not want to play either guy.
Them. Yeah, I
or
agree.
any of them for the time being. And I think eventually Kareem Hunt will have the most important touches in the absence of Isaiah Pacheco. But the one that I think is very interesting to keep an eye on, once again, one of our favorite games to target this week, Joe Mixon's injury. If he's out, I actually think he will miss this week. One more just to be safe. Cam Akers at 53. I mean, they were down 21-0 early in that game, and he was not efficient. Only had 12 touches. He did salvage with a touchdown.
No one's going to want to play him either.
Yeah, I mean, we'll just kind of see what happens. I think his ownership won't be as obviously popular as it was when he was 47. But if Pierce and Mixon are out, once again, he has potential as a 5-box running back.
Right.
You don't really see that often at 5,300.
For sure. And then let's start building some lineups. Of course, we have our wide receivers. Tell me there's going to be a couple wide receivers that we want to talk about that we haven't talked about yet. Of course, up here at the top with our studs, you want to talk about Rashee Rice. Of course, he is the only guy that we're going to talk about for KC, other than the possible running back situation. He's been insane. He's a wide receiver 1. He is. Yes. That's all we can say about it. He's a guy we have to talk about a little bit. But yeah.
The only thing with Kansas City is just the Chargers essentially lost all their important players.
Yeah.
Their quarterback might miss. Both tackles might miss. Derwin James got suspended for a couple of personal foul penalties, which whether or not that was warranted, it doesn't matter. It sounds like he's going to miss at least this game.
Yes.
And so obviously Kansas City all of a sudden is now a huge favorite, one of the biggest favorites on the road this week, which, the trends, because obviously dogs have been king this year so far, say to side with a more competitive game. But it's just kind of hard to see if it's Easton Stick or is that even still their?
That's who they're.
So we saw the thing that sticks out of my mind with Easton Stick is 63-3 against the Chargers. Obviously, I don't think it'll be that bad. Hopefully, it shouldn't be under Jim Harbaugh at least. But this is a game where it's just unfortunately it's going to be a bad game script. And it's not going to be a true test of how these teams are playing. And it's unfortunate that the Chargers are at home during all these injuries. And instead of this being like on the road, we'll take that L and then we'll see y'all when you come to LA. Well, now, when they're healthy, hopefully later in the season, it'll have to go to KC. So that'll be a tougher kind of thing, road to go by with them. But yeah, Rashee Rice still can salvage and perform wide receiver 1 numbers once again before it gets too out of hand.
Yep. And then looking at some other guys, basically everybody that we have, we've already talked about with our stacks. But one guy that I want to talk about is Jawan Jennings. Where are you, Jawan? Because we have to talk about you. Jawan Jennings, man. He just went absolutely ballistic in this last game, man.
Yeah.
Crazy.
11, 175 and 3 scores. I believe that was the highest fantasy total the entire season so far.
Yes.
And obviously, we didn't play enough of him. We had probably right around even with the field.
Yeah.
And it just made us sick because, I mean,
we were close.
It was also unfortunate because I had Purdy as the mid-tier play. And then we were just like, nah, let's cancel him out because both Debo and Kittle are out. And we'll just ride with stars and scrubs. And he still goes for 3 touchdowns and flirts with 300 yards. Plays well. It would have been great to stack him with. But the thing is, Brandon Ayuk struggled.
Yep.
Jordan Mason struggled despite them playing from ahead the entire game and then moving the ball. It was a very weird game. But again, they're home favorites again. I don't expect Debo to play.
Right.
I don't know about George Kittle, but usually hammy injuries, there's a little bit more sensitivity to it. So if it's just him and Brandon Ayuk again, He's going to be very popular, but I wonder if this is a little bit of Rashid Shaheed things where Rashid comes off 2 straight games of a bomb touchdown and then is 23% owned in a good spot against Philly and then just absolutely has a goose egg.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll be that bad, but I think the risk is there for that kind of pullback after a huge career game like he just had.
I could see 6 fantasy points and not be surprised at all.
Yeah.
Like 3 for 30, not be surprised by that
But
at
at
all.
the same time, even though I do mention that, I'm not willing to take the stand like I'm just going to outright fade him. But
Yeah.
I would just kind of be careful because there's other guys in the same range. Deontay Johnson, same price. I like him way more. George Pickens, we're going to have a ton of him.
Right.
Right below him, Tank Dell, 5,400. A bring back of that, Brian Thomas Jr. or Christian Kirk, whoever tickles your fancy. Roma Dunze, 5,200, great spot. If Keenan Allen even misses, that's even better for him.
Yes.
All those guys I actually prefer over Juwan Jennings, but Juwan actually might be the most popular of the bunch.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
or maybe second
if
behind
Debo is
Deontay,
out,
but
I guess, because he's still doubtful at this point. But yeah, so let's make some lines. I thought we had to make sure we talk about those guys.
Right.
At quarterback, which quarterback do you want to start with? Because we have so many quarterbacks. I think we should only make a studs, mid tier, and a puke stack before we get out of here. And on Sunday, obviously, we'll do the big stuff. So if you want to see us make all of our lines, Sunday's the day to do it.
Right. So let's start off. We're going to go ahead and do CJ Stroud because he just had 2 straight banger games against Jacksonville, and Jacksonville's defense looks like the worst in football right now. So let's just kind of see. It's interesting. Let's pretend in this narrative that Joe Mixon misses.
Yes.
So Cam Akers is a viable play. You can double him if you want to, or you don't have to in this regard. But I'm actually interested to see who you actually prefer as his 2 options.
Well, I'm if I had to pick, I'm going Nico and Tank Dell in this situation because I'm more on the fact that I think that the blow up game for Tank Dell is more likely. Then I think Cam Akers is probably safer, but Tank Dell is more like I think if he goes off, he's going to be the guy that we have to have, and he's the same price basically. So
I'm hoping after 3 straight weeks, his ownership kind of dips below 10%, and we can kind of exploit that a little bit.
And he has a Q tag next to his name. That doesn't hurt either, right?
Yeah, he got banged up on the final drive, shot to the ribs. But
yeah, he's fine. He's going to play.
With that being said, I actually want to call the bring back option.
Perfect.
And I'm going to go ahead and ride with the well. And I don't know if the ownership will be there enough to, make it a popular play as the most popular bring back. But Christian Kirk, obviously he struggled the first 2 weeks. He had a ton of snaps, but just was not getting involved. Once again, coach speak, they made an emphasis. We got to get this guy more involved. Lo and behold, even despite them getting absolutely plastered last night, 47-10. Leads the team with 10 targets, 8 for 79. There's the Christian Kirk that we know.
Yeah, of course.
The safety valve for
where's he been?
For Trevor Lawrence. Honestly, Evan Ingram, I honestly don't even expect him to play. Even if he does, he should be severely limited. And usually Christian Kirk we said this at the beginning. When Evan Ingram went off, that was when Christian Kirk went down. But without Evan Ingram in the lineup, Christian Kirk actually elevated even more. So I just like him in the spot. He's a very reasonable price. Basically, it's just kind of between him and Brian Thomas at this point. I think Brian Thomas, because of his consistency, might get some more ownership. But Kirk is my preference in this bring back.
I don't disagree with you. The guy that we're going to go to running backs next. I want to get some of the Arizona-Washington games, so I have to go get some Washington running back at 6,100. It feels too cheap for Brian Robinson with the Eckler out. I think it just makes way too much sense. And I think the hardest position on this slate is tight end.
Yes.
So if you do it this way, you could also go Trey McBride if you wanted to. Even if we don't know if he's going to play. So at this point, you're kind of just putting him in there if he does play. But would you like to do that, or do you want to go?
I totally agree. And I'm just kind of thinking about the bring back because it's one of 2 names for me. And I just kind of want to play around a little bit to see what else we can fit before we make that decision. Because obviously it's between Marvin Harrison Jr. and then whether your preference is Dortch or Wilson doesn't matter. It's $4,300 to $4,200 for the second one. If we had to go that cheap, which I think all of those guys are viable, especially Trey McBride is potentially out.
Yeah. So I guess we need to go get another running back then.
Yeah. Are we able to get a stud?
No, I
No,
don't
you
think
don't
so.
think so?
Well, if we go with Trey McBride, no.
Well, Trey's out. I'm anticipating he's going to
You're
miss.
gonna okay.
Yes.
So let's get a defense. What defense other than
That's a tough question because,
this
again,
is the defense you want, right?
kind of. Honestly, against Easton Stick,
Yeah.
I don't mind it at all. But even all the other options, Sanford against New England, we saw what the Jets did last week, and then the Jets against Bo Nix, they've done really well against bad quarterbacks so far. Cleveland against Gardner Minshew on the board, but probably my least favorite of the bunch. Pittsburgh versus Indy. Anthony Richardson has been incredibly awful at being inconsistent. So, and turning the ball over.
Pittsburgh is
and
so
Pittsburgh's
good.
been the best defense by far if you look at their numbers. 3,300, they're the favorite. I think they're a great play as well. It's kind of hard to see, below 3,000. Once again, typically we do the cheap defenses, but other than Minnesota, who's
Yeah, I
had
was gonna
5
say
sacks,
maybe the Vikings.
they've had 5 sacks in each of the first 3 games of the season. And I think that was the first time in a long while that has happened for a team. So they're interesting if we want to go cheap, but yeah, I think long story less long. I'm going to start with the Chiefs.
Yeah, I agree. I think that makes the most sense. Running back, I don't think we can get a stud, unfortunately. Who would you want to go with out of the? I guess we could go KC.
Well,
we go Chuba.
I would say
Cincinnati.
let's try Chuba. Because I bet you in this line, because of the bring back that we're going to have with Arizona, we can't get to Deontay Johnson as the flex because I don't want James Conner. So yeah, going Chuba leaves some salary on the table, and then obviously with that being said, the flex we're going to have to go with the secondary of the bring back. So do you have a preference between Dortch and Michael Wilson?
I do. I think I'm on the Mike Wilson side of it.
All right, on the same page there.
Cool, and he's $100 cheaper.
Exactly.
Love to see that.
And then 5,600. I think we left enough, but I'm not sure.
For Brock Bowers?
Yeah, we did. It's fun.
I love it.
We're having fun.
I love Brock.
All right. So yeah, first look
with the CJ Stroud.
Double stack, bring back with CJ Stroud build, and then the other highest total game, which is the Cardinals and the Commanders, have a skinny of that. Probably the safest defense that you can think of on the slate. Probably also going to be the most popular defense. Brock Bowers. It's an ugly up top tight end slate this week, but he's been tight end 2 overall through 3 weeks. Brian Robinson should be a 5-box running back if he was at home. But Austin Eckler's also plenty of opportunities through the air and through the ground. And then Chuba Hubbard, once again, you saw what Cincinnati allowed the first 2 weeks. Week 3 was kind of more of the passing attack.
Right.
But they still allowed 3 rushing touchdowns. So Chuba Hubbard, 5,700. He was, I believe, the highest scoring running back this past weekend.
I think so.
Oh, other than Saquon Barkley, of course. But yeah, 5,700 is still too cheap. Pretty solid build in my opinion.
Yeah, I like it a lot. Let me clear it. We're going to go to mid-range, and I think the mid-range is either Caleb or Jaden. I'm going to just say we're going to go Jaden. Okay. I don't think I want to make a Caleb build if we have bad weather. I think the double stack.
That's what I was interested to see if you were going to single or double it.
I think the double is where I'm going to go, okay. And it's going to be Brian and Mr. Terry Mr. Scary. Where is Mr. Scary Terry? There he is. So 5,800.
All right. So in this regard, real quick decisions. I want Marvin Harrison to be the bring back on this one.
Perfect.
And then since we're also going to try to get some Jacksonville Houston love, we didn't do it the first lineup. Let's do Cam Akers with the second one if we're anticipating Joe Mixon missing.
Okay. I like it. Cam, there you are, buddy. Let's go to defense. Let's put the Chiefs in because I'm really comfortable with them as a defense, and we have been really bad at picking defenses. So let's just throw the most comfortable defense, right? Next game, we still have an opportunity here to go Jacksonville. I'm staying, I think, with Jacksonville wide receivers or possibly going down to a tight end. I know they got the crap beat out of them. So
Brent
truly,
Strange kind of had a pedestrian game, but he did score.
yeah. And
but
what was
he
this?
also
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. Just want to say even though he had 2 for 12, he still had 5 targets. And if you're 3,100 and you get 5 targets a game, obviously he had second on the team in targets the previous week. I think he's in the realm of outcomes that he could play well.
70% of the snaps.
Exactly.
Which is great to see.
Not too bad. If you didn't want to go a Jacksonville receiver, I totally understand. And plus, we can get some room to possibly get a couple stud plays.
I was hoping to get a stud running back in this one is why. I was thinking that would work. It's still going to cut it close, though. Man, that's crazy to me. We're going to make some really cool stuff happen on our puke stack. Which running back do you want to try out?
Let's go with Mr. Bijan Robinson.
Giving us 47?
Yeah.
What's 47 looking like?
So that's 100 short from Xavier Legette. Demario Douglas worked out for us on the showdown this past weekend. Can run it back with him. San Fran, obviously, they allowed pretty much just kind of sporadic to a lot of people, but Tutu ended up with the big gain at the end to help put the game over the top.
Do you want to go down at defense by chance?
Yeah, we can try.
Because I think, that's a place where you can kind of catch some money. Steelers are an option. Minnesota has been really good. And if they're playing against Malik Willis, I actually think I'm okay with that.
Absolutely. That probably vaults to either the Chiefs or the Vikings as my favorite defense, if that's the case. I'm actually predicting Jordan Love to play, but in this, we can have some fun and just pretend that he is out. So with that being said,
did it help me?
Did it help you? Yeah, exactly.
Always the question.
That's the tough thing. We didn't get up to.
I was hoping to get to Deontay.
Yeah,
and I did not.
Who's some cheaper options defensively? Maybe that we can even get a little more uncomfortable. Can't even go that far.
2,500, I guess, is what I need.
Maybe a Denver.
Yeah, that's who I would say. The Broncos. They have a good secondary. Riley Moss was the highest graded cornerback this week for any team. That's pretty cool.
That's pretty impressive
for PFF. And obviously Denver won. Patrick Surtain on the other side. That makes you feel better.
And obviously, other than really Breece Hall, there hasn't been and I guess you have to mention Braylon Allen as well at this point. There, Garrett Wilson, even though he scored last week, he just is not on the same page with Aaron Rodgers right now. So if you think that game might be, lower scoring, at that point, you just need 5 points. So I feel fine about it, and then that allows you to afford either Pickens or Deontay, and I'm fine honestly with either. I think Deontay is going to be the more popular play, but Pickens is just one of my favorite plays this week.
Yeah, I think he's going to explode this week, and so I'm more than welcoming a Pickens stack, Pickens play against Indy, who's just been terrible. I think the Broncos are the cheapest defense I'll go. I think it's Broncos, Minnesota, Steelers, and Chiefs. So yeah. But yeah, I actually like this line a lot. I think that we're about to make a really cool line with our puke stack, though, because it's going to be a lot cheaper and a lot more nice to us when we want to go for the running backs on the top.
So the $1 million question, quite literally in this $20 entry, would be Justin Fields or Andy Dalton as our puke.
It's got to be Andy Dalton, man.
All right. Got
to be, right?
So yeah, we're going to just click on Andy Dalton, just figure it out. Deontay Johnson's going no matter what.
Well, yeah, buddy.
He's 56. Dang. And then the question now becomes, do you want to go all the way down to Jonathan Mingo, who had a ton of snaps? Do you want to get Xavier Legette, who could possibly be replacing Adam Thielen as a wide receiver too? Or do you just want to play it safe and be like Chuba's the alpha in the backfield, and we're gonna run with him?
What do you think the ownership will be to Andy Dalton this week?
I bet you it'll be closer to 8 to 10%, which will be probably among the top 6.
Okay. No, I completely agree. That's what I was wondering. So if you do their normal stack, I think it's Chuba and Deontay.
Yep.
Which is going to be your 6-ish% probably stack. We can get different in other places, obviously. But if you think that that's viable, let me know. Like I will, because Chuba's right here. I could click him now, unless you have a guy that you're more comfortable with.
It's very interesting. I'm pulling up the breakdown in terms of the stats. Xavier Legette 2 for 42 on 3 targets. Obviously, that was his first 2 games with targets. Jonathan Mingo has actually been playing consistently in terms of snap shares, like 56, then 63, and then even 66. So he's even increasing on top of the Thielen injury happening. But he's also 3,300.
Yeah.
He makes a puke stack even more affording of other things.
Even more pukier.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I actually don't know between Mingo and Legette who would be the least popular, but it's clearly those two. And I'm not willing to go down to Tommy Tremble
No.
this week, even if I'm uncomfortable with tight end. I'd rather just play one of the receivers. Obviously, Andy Dalton's been susceptible to having multiple receivers go off. But yeah, going Mingo and then look at all the remainder that we'll have, especially
Well, yeah,
with
let's
what we can do.
put our defense in, and then will
Let's just
really
start,
see the
let's
remainder.
start Chiefs and we'll just go from
Okay,
there. And
so-
then obviously there's no tight end more expensive than that, so we're gonna have even more to spend on.
Right, and I'm okay with spending low on tight end in this stack. I think I want to stack the best player and one of our favorite players in football, in Jamar Chase. So getting a Jamar Chase line, haven't really talked about him. He is definitely on our list.
Had his breakout game finally. That was my anytime touchdown prop that I called out, and
He had 2.
He had 2. I wish I got an even bonus for it.
Yeah, right.
That would have been cool. But
So we're gonna take Jamar Chase for sure. I want to get Washington, Arizona, probably. But you said Jacksonville, Houston.
Yeah, that's another game to go to. If we go down all the way to, how do you feel about like planting is kind of right in the middle of like value versus like completely punting tight end, but just put in Pat Freiermuth for now and just say he's the Cole Kmet of the week, like I mentioned, and maybe at 3,900 that leaves us to maybe even get a couple stud running backs.
Okay, let's try it. Let's see what happens. I don't really want an indie player.
No, that's totally fine.
Even
in a potential single stack or even double stack of Justin Fields, I'm not forcing indie players because Michael Pittman has been the bust of all busts that we called out in best ball and redraft, wherever you wanted to play. If you picked him, you were not happy. And then everybody else is just splitting the workload other than JT, who's going off. But there's just other running backs in better spots this week that we want to get to.
Oh, yeah. Which running backs do you think are the best plays on the slate?
I think Jordan Mason is the first one that comes to mind. Obviously, that was the first negative game script for New England, and they were just diced left and right by both Hall and Braylon Allen. Jordan Mason has an even more singular workload.
Right.
He's still too cheap at 67, and I'm hoping that because he's still increased after a rough game, that maybe his ownership won't be 50% for the 3rd straight week.
Fair enough, yeah. I gotta sneeze. Go ahead, sorry.
And then let's go with the final game. Are we going to correlate it? We haven't really talked Rams Bears yet.
I think that was actually where I was thinking because I think we can fit
I don't think we can.
You don't think so?
Let's see. We might have to go down the Steelers. Yeah, we have to go down the Steelers. If you're talking about DJ Moore,
he's $100.
Yep.
Oh, so sad. We could go down, and it wouldn't be a problem. Or
us going all in on a defense has not worked out so far this season, so I'm fine sprinkling a little bit. But even if you wanted to go all the way to
Saquon or Brees or
but even like I'd say let's even keep Kyron in on this one, and then go down to DJ, and then we can just pick up Steelers D.
Okay.
And just be fine with it, and then be like, oh, we can justify why we didn't do the bring back of a Colt player because they're just going to get shut out.
Yeah, because they suck.
Yeah, exactly.
Cleveland versus the Raiders, Carolina and Cincinnati, and the Steelers.
Cincinnati is the easiest defensive fade that I can even think of right now, But now that I said that, they're going to have 2 special teams touchdowns.
Yeah, that's how it'll work. But yeah, I really like this. Gives us a lot of high-powered.
And you're getting very contrarian because you're fading the Commanders and Cardinals game, which is by far the highest total on the slate. And you're also fading the Houston and Jags game, which I think will be one of the highest owned games on the slate. Hey, very different on that regard, but
yeah, we did that in the first week when we faded Houston
and the highest totals so far each week have just been very deadly. in terms of them meeting expectation. Even though the Cardinals and the Bills was one of the highest totals that we were targeting, even though that still hit 62, it was the weirdest 62 game that you could think of because both quarterbacks you didn't stack anybody with them.
Right.
Neither of it worked out. It was just a weird game. And then before you had the Bucks and Lions game, which you called it being a lower scoring game, and so there wasn't as many other than Amon-Ra
Right.
going off, and then obviously Evans was a huge bust in, and then this past week Detroit and Arizona was by far the highest total, 20-13, which was one of the lowest totals on the week.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's not far fetched to say that based on the trends and the way that the market's been going with all these spreads and dogs just kind of taking over.
Yep. Question, because I asked this question last week. Well, who are your core cash plays at that are like 60%, 50%? If you're going to play like a single entry, these are the guys you're going to want. Do you have any this week, considering there are so many good quarterbacks? If you had to pick just a couple guys.
Man, I think a good cash play as a receiver is Nico Collins.
Okay.
Very fair to get to. He's the clear alpha in the offense, obviously, and it's a great total. It's a great slate to go to. We're going to have a lot of ownership of him, even though we didn't really build a line with him other than the CJ Stroud double. In terms of running backs, you can just kind of go right back to the well with Saquon Barkley. Again, could be without both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. He's going to have 30-plus touches in a good game environment for him. So basically kind of spinning up top. In terms of value, it's very interesting because obviously Cam Akers becomes the only like 20% or plus that is 55 and below if Mixon's out. And then receiver-wise, it's really kind of uncomfortable, but everybody in the 5,600 range, so Deontay, Juwan Jennings, even a Jacksonville receiver, like, are all viable, I think, in my eyes, as bring backs. Tight end, I don't even know who the cash game play is at tight
I agree.
end, really.
It's really
honestly, because if you go all the way to the top, Trey McBride could be missing. George Kittle could be missing.
Yeah.
Kelsey has been awful, and they're 8.5-point favorite, so he's maybe touchdown or bust in this regard. Even if this is a get right spot for him, TJ's still out. Njoku's not playing. Ingram might not play.
Yeah.
Pitts, great spot because Goddard 160 last week. Well, Kyle Pitts, they just don't want to throw him the damn ball, and it's pissing us off. It's probably Dallas Goedert, especially if
I think
you
that's
have
right.
the two receivers missing. I wouldn't recommend stacking him with Barkley. I don't think
Right.
every day both of them are going to combine for over 300 yards.
Yeah, probably not.
But I mean, if you want to just kind of sprinkle, sure, whatever. But that's probably the one of the safer ones, and it's kind of contingent on both receiver, or even if one receiver misses, he'll probably still be kind of safe.
Right.
But very safe if both do.
Yeah. Now my cash game plays, if I'm just talking about guys that Cam didn't state, I'm gonna definitely throw Brian Robinson in there.
Yes.
He, I think, has to be one of the guys you go to because of the fact that he's going to get so many more touches. Jordan Mason is probably a guy that you could probably throw in there. I don't know if you said him. I'm sorry.
No, I did not.
Yeah, I think Jordan Mason makes sense.
Even though I think his ownership won't be 50%, he'll still be one of the 5 highest on the slate because he's one of the true only 5-box running backs on the entire slate.
Yeah. The other at wide receiver, my cash play is going to be Marvin Harrison. In a situation where he goes against Washington. Washington is just terrible in the back end. And so I think it makes a lot of sense. One guy that you didn't say that I think I expected you to say, so I'll take him, fine, is George Pickens.
Well, the thing is, I don't think his ownership will be that high.
That's fair.
But
for cash
he's
game
going
plays.
to be
For our cash.
He's going to be one of our most popular plays this week. But I was anticipating that he'll probably still hover around 10 to 12%.
Yes.
And I think between him being right next to Deontay Johnson and Juwan Jennings, and then right below that, in a very stackable game in Houston, Jacksonville,
of course,
he's going to be one of the lowest owns in that range. And I love him. He's going to be in a lot of lines, but since we were just talking cash builds, I was just thinking ownership. That's why he slipped my mind.
Of course. Well, I added some guys, but all those guys that we've talked about are going to be most of our viable, like, go-to plays this week. Add the Chiefs defense in there, and then add some of our quarterbacks, and that's how we're going to think about building this week. Let me stop sharing because that is the end of the show. We will be back, of course, on Sunday at 8:30 in the morning to start talking about this slate. We're going to switch it around a little bit, I think, this week, kind of talking about getting this slate done at like 10 o'clock. We have the most viewers at that point. We have the most comments and questions at that point. And also, it's getting closer to lock. I think it's the best time to talk about this slate, which is the slate that everybody plays the most.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we can't thank you guys enough. Please like, comment, subscribe. We had a huge week last week on prop betting, spreads, ATS. We had a clean sweep across the board for GTD, so patted ourselves on the back for that. We're still looking for the big breakout main slate, though. That hasn't been so kind to us, but it is coming. So if we're still profiting despite struggling with the main, just wait until we start kind of hitting some consistency with the mains, because that is some of the best ways to make the money, especially if you're playing the contest that you're supposed to be playing.
For sure. And if you haven't gotten the chance, you missed out, obviously, if you weren't in our Discord on some of our picks. Make sure you get in our Discord. Our prize picks and underdog picks hit a lot last week. Cam, like we said, he happened to, on Thursday night, put his first look happened to be the play of the week, basically. It was top 15 in almost every contest. But we don't always just put our plays on the video and Thursday Night Football video. We put them in the Discord because they change. We're recording this 2 days earlier. We record these videos earlier in the week. As the gets closer, things change. And so most of the time they don't look necessarily the exact same. Make sure you get in our Discord so you can see the final picks and stuff like that.
Yeah. But yeah, we appreciate it. Can't thank you enough. Follow us on our socials. Let's keep on interacting, and we'll see you all on Sunday.
Yeah. Y'all have a good one.